Welcome to the summer edition of Beyond the Headlines. I am Jack Weinstein, a professor of the practice of international relations at the Pardee School of Global Studies at Boston University. I am also a retired Air Force lieutenant general. Welcome to the summer edition of Beyond the Headlines. I am Jack Weinstein, a professor of the practice of international relations at the Pardee School of Global Studies at Boston University. I am also a retired Air Force lieutenant. Welcome to the summer edition of Beyond the Headlines. I am Jack Weinstein, a professor of the practice of international. Now that we have our technical difficulties behind us, we can move on. Our panel today will discuss the relationship between society and the military. This is a rich topic, and I'm really excited with the expert panel members we have today. We're also greatly looking forward to your questions, because that will be bringing the subject down so we can actually hear what your issues are and what your concerns are, as well as questions. Before I introduce the panel, I want to thank the experts behind the scenes. So to Kelly and Andrew, we couldn't do this without you, so thank you. Today, our panel members, first we have Dr. Risa Brooks. Dr. Brooks is an Allis Chalmers Associate Professor of Political Science at Marquette University. She's an adjunct scholar at West Point's Modern War Institute and a senior associate in the International Security Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. She is the author of numerous books and research issues related to the American and comparative civil-military relations, military effectiveness, and political violence. Dr. Brooks, welcome. We also have Brigadier General Christopher Walker, also goes by his call sign Mookie. He is the Assistant Adjutant General and Commander of the West Virginia Air National Guard. He is a 1988 graduate of the United States Air Force Academy. He is a C-130 evaluator navigator and has commanded at the squadron and group level and has deployed in numerous overseas and contingency operations. So General Walker, welcome. And we have Dr. Rosella Cappella Zielinski. Dr. Zielinski, an associate professor of political science at Boston University, specializing in the study of political economy of security with an emphasis on economic mobilization for war, defense spending, and wartime coalition procurement. And she is just an expert that I work with constantly. So Dr. Zielinski, welcome. We're going to go to our panel members for some opening thoughts and comments. So we're going to go in reverse order. Dr. Zielinski, over to you for some comments. Thank you.
Hey, everybody. Okay. So clearly, as the past couple months have shown us, we're in this really critical juncture in our society regarding various American institutions. And we're finding ourselves taking these crash courses. And I've been teaching national security for a while now. And the number one institution I think we need to talk about more is the United States military, because we're really not having great conversations on civil military relations and diversity in the military. And that's not surprising when you think about it. Most people don't know members of the military anymore. While about 1.3 million people comprise the active duty component of the military, that's only 0.5% of the American population. So we need to have these conversations. So I'm going to say a couple words on civil military relations first, and then on diversity in the military. And so in regards to civil relations, you may have seen this image, and hopefully we can get that up for you, of Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, in his battle dress, walking alongside Secretary of Defense Mark Esper and President Trump on July 3rd, after the Black Lives Matter protesters were cleared from Lafayette Square in DC. And I want you to take a second and look at that image and think to yourself, okay, what do I think of the military? What do I think of the president? What do I think of presidential policies? And what should the relationship between civilian and military leaders be? And this photo ended up being quite unnerving for many scholars and practitioners in civil military relations, and mostly because of what General Milley is wearing, and that is his battle dress, but not Army service uniform. And we can talk about that in Q&A with our experts here today. But in seeing this image, what's happening is we're politicizing the military. we have a long-standing norms in the United States that the military should be depoliticized. They are best for managing violence, being the best, most effective force possible, and staying out of politics. And so one could easily say, hey, that's just a photo, or yeah, you know what, that's just a uniform. But the reality is it's not. And we have some evidence behind that. Two CivMil scholars, Jim Goldby and Peter Fever, did some survey experiments to see how Americans internalize when the military is politicized. And they found that when priming the public to think the military supported or opposed the president on a politicized issue, that significantly damaged public trust in the military. So the old saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words, this picture politicizes the military in ways that damage our trust in it as public citizens. And to be clear, General Milley apologized. And he stated, I quote, "I should not have been there." And he went on to say, "We must hold dear the principles of an apolitical military that is so deeply rooted in the essence of our republic." So that's the first conversation I think we are going to be having today, is thinking about the politicization of the military. And we need to have a second conversation, and I think they're related in many ways, and that's on race in the military. Here's another picture. Let me just start there with another picture. I got two pictures and I promise I'll stop, everybody. This is an image of the Joint Chiefs of Staff recently. And you're going to notice a couple things when you look at it. And the first thing I notice is the lack of diversity, the absolute lack of diversity. And I should note that this will change as the incoming Air Force Chief of Staff, General Brown, is coming in, and he'll be a first African-American chief. So I'll say three quick comments on diversity. What is diversity in the military? What does it look like? Is it important and why? And who's responsible for promoting it? Because I think as citizens, that latter question is the most important. So in the numbers, the military is actually equally racially diverse as our citizen population. But where we really fall short is at the senior leadership level. So for example, Hispanics make up almost 18% of enlisted, but only 8% of the officer corps, and only 2% of Hispanics make general. African Americans comprise about 18.5% of the force, with only 8% making officer and 8% making general officer. And for women, these numbers are woefully inadequate. Women make up about 15% of the total active duty force in the Army, 20% in the Navy, 20.2% in the Air Force, and only 8.6% in the Marines. And again, senior leadership, absolutely even lower. Air Force has the highest number of female senior leaders at 9.2%, with the Marines a low at 2.1%. So there are lots of arguments to be made about why diversity is important, from better creative problem solving to innovation, improved decision-making. But I'm going to highlight one, and we can talk about it more in Q&A, and that is actually performance on the battlefield. One of my amazing colleagues up at Dartmouth, Jason Law, wrote this phenomenal book called Divided Armies, and looking at 200 years of history has found that armies that have egalitarian values and that reflect the diversity of their societies perform better in war. So we are a very tip of spear conversation in our society when it comes to the military. And the tip of spear, if that's where we're going to have this conversation, that's where diversity actually is the most important. And then finally, and again, this is to provoke conversation, is who's responsible for promoting diversity in the military? Well, number one is Congress, right? Congress is, under the Constitution, mandated to raise and support armies, and it has used demographics, race, gender, sexual orientation to think about who's in, who's out, who gets promoted, and why. So these are important. And again, happy to talk about this more in Q&A. The second is the executive branch. Executive orders can promote inclusion. Obama, 2009, gays can serve openly, and can promote exclusion. If we take President Trump's tweets as executive order, we can think about recent effects on the transgender military ban. And finally, it's also up to the services and at the Secretary of Defense level, and as well as each individual services, to promote policies that promote the upward movement of underrepresented groups in society. And I'll just conclude that at the end of the day, it's on us as civilians. I think when we think about civilian control of the military, we think of extreme senior leaders, but actually these are this is our military, us as taxpayers and us as citizens. So we have power in advocating for diversity and civil military control of the military. All right, I look forward to Q&A.
Dr. Zielinski, thank you very much. And you're 100% right. Members of the military need to look up to their leadership and need to see people that look like them. And they know they can succeed. If they look up the chain of command and no one looks like them, then what is the incentive to stay?
Right.
So you bring up a very good point that we'll get into. Over to General Walker for his opening comments.
Good afternoon, everybody. All of my friends know me as Mookie. If you ask somebody roaming around the Pentagon or in the Guard and say, I'm looking for Christopher Walker, they'll shrug their shoulders and go, I don't know who you're talking about. And they say, Mookie, oh, he's right behind that wall. But that's how I like my folks to also be able to know that they can come talk to me about anything. And so some of the things that Rosella brought up, I'd like to talk about as well. But first, when we're going to be talking about CivMil relations today, I want us to also look at the angle of the National Guard. I spent 9 years in the active duty, but the National Guard is one of our key points in reaching into the neighborhoods and the society, because we live there. And when people talk about the Guard in West Virginia, for instance, West Virginia that does not have any active duty bases or posts or forts. If you walk throughout West Virginia in a uniform, anybody from a 3-year-old to a 98-year-old, I guarantee is going to walk up to you saying, thank you for your service. I thought it was a phenomenon during the 9/11 time period, but no, it was happening actually before then. It still happens to this day because of the National Guard being there to help with floods and any other kind of natural disasters, getting into the community. The community sees people in uniform as the people to run to for help. And so that is one of the aspects I hope with some of your questions you'll dig into, because some people have no idea about the differences between active duty, reserve, and Guard. We are all trained to the same standard, and when we deploy in Title 10 status, you cannot tell us apart from active duty. But when we're in the state, we're under the command of the governor, and we can be used in other ways. Let's talk about something else that Rosella was talking about, diversity in the military. So the phrase never let a crisis go to waste has grown to have negative connotations over the years, but it's time to put it into a positive light. So leadership within the DoD have sometimes been loath to speak openly to their fellow airmen, soldiers, Marine sailors about difficult subjects for decades, as Rosella brought up earlier. Whether the subject has been women in combat, the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, or other controversial subjects, leadership at all levels tended to shy away from open discussion because of the potential for the conversation to get emotional and cause division. But in fact, the lack of conversation, I think, has contributed more to the division than the silence. And so the leaders in our organizations, and that includes commanders, chiefs, superintendents, supervisors, senior NCOs, junior NCOs, and even fresh soldiers and airmen and sailors, because being a leader doesn't, in most cases, doesn't have anything to do with rank. Being a leader means you have people who are willing to follow you. And so the lowliest ranks can also be leaders. So leaders of all types need to be open to conversation about what's going on and encourage that conversation. So you notice a word that Rosella used earlier. She said conversation. She didn't say get lectured, okay? So with this conversation, the second and most important part of that is listening. We need to listen to understand and not listen to respond. Many of us spend a lot of times in our career, all of us, I know, not truly listening, sometimes waiting to respond, and other times being just intellectually lazy, right? Me included. We hear a few words and stereotype the speaker and then make an assumption about the rest. But that means that all we got from the engagement is an echo chamber of what we already thought. And that means no learning, no progress, no evolution. So, and then sometimes we see that our soldiers, airmen, sailors will feel that they cannot address these issues because they're in an Air Force environment or an Army environment. Well, as Ms. Noelle Christie Nolta, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Reserve Affairs and Airman Readiness and works in SAF-MR, she said, environment is our responsibility as senior leaders. So as leaders, we need to sometimes initiate the conversations to create a culture where our soldiers, airmen, Marines, and sailors feel comfortable enough to share their experiences, all right? Dialogue is necessary. Dialogue, not monologue. We need more people conversing with each other, not talking at one another, right? So yes, it'll be hard. Even good friends and family sometimes find it difficult to initiate these tough conversations. You'll have a married couple steaming for months and years, and it blows up in a divorce. And if they just talked about it, all of that could have been avoided, right? So even when you know these conversations would help rather than hurt, it's hard to get that initiation going. So it'll be a crawl, walk, run process. Barriers will break down over time, but if leaders take the lead in breaking the ice, these conversations will occur. Many of us so I'll say this, I'm not a believer in this lecturing service members and instituting mandatory training that is just with people finger wagging and pointing blame, because what that does not bring people together in practice. If one looks at the SOF community, we see tight bands of brothers who are brought together by the crucible of fire. And it happens to almost everybody who goes through basic training. They go in there not knowing who these people are from all over the United States, but at the end of basic training, they're best buddies, and they talk to each other lovingly 30, 40 years later. So what we need to be doing is trying to capture the elements of that kind of bonding and apply it to our DoD service members. Many of us from all backgrounds have had biases and stereotypes we brought in the military when we first swore in, including me. So over time, with time spent in rigorous training and deployments and even combat, many of us learned to free ourselves of those stereotypes and biases, and some of us have not. We're not all perfect, right? So senior leaders within the military need to actively encourage their subordinates to talk to one another. And every soldier, airman, Marine, of every race, creed, religion, sexuality, need to absolutely be certain in their hearts that leadership and every other service member would lay across the train tracks for them to take care of them and protect them. And so that is what we need to be endeavoring to do. So I'll stop with that, and I hope we have vigorous conversation today.
Mookie, thank you very much. And I just want the audience to know that the West Virginia Guard does a phenomenal podcast that I listened to this past week. And I believe it's number 8 on
Yes.
Racism. I highly suggest everyone go and find that podcast because General Walker's 1,000% correct. There's a huge difference between lecturing and dialogue. And sometimes people don't understand the vast difference. I'm real excited now to give the floor to Dr. Brooks. So Risa, over to you for some opening comments. Thank you.
Thank you, and nice to be with you. Thanks for having me and inviting me. I thought I'd pick up on the theme that Rosella raised about politicization of the military and sort of elaborate on some ways to think about that problem, just in my 3 to 5 minutes here. And just to be clear, when I'm talking about politicization in this context, I mean the military being pulled into or acting like an actor in domestic politics. So an interest group or individuals acting like partisan figures or participating in partisan politics. So that's what I mean. And I think one way to think about it is using a supply and a demand metaphor to sort of think about the different dimensions of what's causing or could cause the military's politicization in this sense. And so I think there are two demand elements. And so, for example, something that Rosella also mentioned was that civilian leadership is increasingly, or especially in recent years, been looking to the military to act like a political actor. To act like a co-partisan. And that has especially been acute under the current president, Donald Trump, who has done several things to explicitly portray or try to characterize the military as his personal political ally. He has done, there's a long list I could cite, but among them are things like referring to the military as, his military, talking about how to military audiences, how they vote for him and support him, signing controversial legislation, executive orders, especially his immigration ban, which is a signature campaign issue in the Pentagon's Hall of Heroes. I mean, many, many things. And so there's a demand by the civilian leadership for the military to act like a political player. And that's one piece. The second piece is also second demand piece is coming from society at large. And there's lots of research these days that members of American society like it when military figures act like they're co-partisans, when they say things that they agree with. They approve of that. They don't want the military to maintain necessarily its nonpartisan ethos, its ethic, that it stands aside from domestic politics, which is deeply ingrained and reinforced by legislation in the military. And I think we see this a little bit with what just happened with retired generals speaking out and admirals speaking out in opposition to Trump's proposition of deploying active duty federal forces to police American citizens in early June to confront protests, the George Floyd protests, that a lot of people who agreed with, say, what retired Marine General Mattis or Admiral Mullen had to say, we're applauding their comments. And I think that that's indicative of this general idea that societal members sometimes demand and want the military to be partisan. The third factor is more a supply issue, and that is that there are some in the military, in fact, according to surveys, a significant number of officers, and I can refer you to Heidi Urban's excellent research from 2016 that did surveys of officers at NDU and elsewhere. There's a large number that would be perfectly fine acting like partisan actors. In her research, she asked about opinions about whether people had seen or thought it was appropriate to make comments about civilian political leaders in social media, including comments about the president that bordered on contemptuous words, which is UCMJ violation. And that there were large numbers that thought that was perfectly fine and didn't buy into the nonpartisan ethos. So here you have this sort of cocktail of society, some in society liking it when military acts like co-partisans, civilian political leaders kind of pulling and wanting that, and then some in the military liking it. And what does that mean? How does that combine? That's a recipe for the military, a deep erosion of the nonpartisan ethic. And I think there's different solutions and issues that need to be tackled in each one of those that triad, but it's a serious issue and one that I think all Americans need to be thinking about and paying attention to because it has pretty profound consequences. Thank you.
Well, everyone gave great comments. Risa, thank you very much. One thing I would like just to explain to everybody is that for commissioned officers, regardless of branch of service, you take an oath of office. And unlike some of our other close allies, we say an oath of office, but our oath is not to a sovereign. It's not to a monarch. It is not to a specific individual. We say an oath of office to the Constitution of the United States. And I think that's a clear item that we may get to in some of the Q&A. But our allegiance is to the Constitution. The President of the United States is the Commander-in-Chief and can give lawful direction to the force. That is different than taking an oath to the Constitution to defend it against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So we'll get into that piece. We have a couple of questions that I want to get into, and we're going to go back. There's an individual that's a BU graduate from 2018, a Pardee graduate of 2018, who's lieutenant in the United States Marine Corps. And her question was, or statement and then a question. In my personal experience, having been witness to the bigotry that is systematically ingrained and authoritatively excused in the military, but I've also been witness to its incredible diversity. Despite the fact that many service members especially believe that the military is a safe space for bigotry and impunity, I have had success in calling out this behavior and having conversations. Thus, I am interested in hearing the panelists' thoughts on the role of Black Lives Matter, feminism, LGBTQIA pride, and other social movements in the military. Does anyone want to grab onto that first? Mookie?
All right, so my first thoughts is the Department of Defense's enduring mission is to provide combat credible military forces needed to deter war and protect the security of our nation. That is mainly done through cohesion. Okay, that's one of the things that that's one of the things that we really cherish within the military, unit cohesion. All right. So my thoughts were that if any of these organizations encourage dialogue rather than monologue, and inclusivity rather than exclusivity, there could be some benefit to working together. And I want to say this, by the way, I'm sorry that the lieutenant has seen such, in her experience, such systematic racism and bigotry, because that has not been my experience for over 30 years. So, so whatever is happening with her first 2 years of experience, she probably needs to get an IG involved if it's that bad. But let's get back to this. Remember earlier when we were talking about listening to each other and listening to understand and not listening to respond? Well, I have seen a few of these organizations forcefully and loudly exclude sometimes. In one particular instance, with a Memorial Day celebration, the quote was, "No whites allowed. This is a safe space for Black people." And that attitude cannot work in the military, where we are all dependent on each other for building unit cohesion. So what we have to do is examine the goals of these particular organizations and their strategic goals. And if their some of those strategic goals match up with some of the DoD's strategic goals, then fine. And we can talk about it and have this dialogue. But when we examine these goals, we have to ask whether that organization is coming to the military wanting unity or obeisance. Do they want harmony or veneration? Okay, do they want solidarity or exaltation? Okay, we bow to you. That's not going to be the way it is, because our military is quite diverse. And so some of the things that some of these organizations may demand, they can't demand. They can talk to us and try to win people over. And that's how things have worked with our military. Just yesterday, the state of Mississippi decided that they're going to pull down that flag, the last remaining state flag with the Confederate symbol on it. And they didn't do that by burning down the state house. They did that by dialogue and voting. Okay, and that's the way. And that's the way our military is going to work, with dialogue. So to answer the question, yes, there's a place for those organizations if they're willing to have dialogue with us.
So if I could just make one point, and first I feel obligated to say this, but I feel bad that the lieutenant has seen so much bigotry in her very short time. She's been on active duty less than 2 years. And as someone that used to wear the uniform, I would love to be in your command so I can, what looks like needs to be cleaned up.
Yeah, we got to fix it, whatever it is.
I do want to tell her, though, that when I was the commander of the ICBM, well, I was the commander of an ICBM unit, an intercontinental ballistic missile unit in Wyoming. I won't call Wyoming a diverse state by any stretch of the imagination. I was trying to figure out what it was like to be a Black officer working in Cheyenne, Wyoming. So I got all my Black officers together one day for a dialogue. I didn't tell them what it was about. When I walked into the room, one of my very astute lieutenants looked at me and goes, "Well, Colonel, obviously there's one person in here that looks different than all of us. Why are you here?" And I go, "I'm here because I want to know what it's like to be a Black officer living in Wyoming." And the person looked at me and said, "Do you really want the truth?" I go, "I definitely want the truth." And then 2.5 hours later, the conversation ended. And I thought that dialogue was something that was beneficial for both of us because it opened my eyes on some things. And obviously, just like I've been told, you know, God gave us one mouth and two ears. Perhaps we need to listen more than we need to speak. Does anyone else have anything to add on this question? Rosella, please.
Technology. I'm actually pretty impressed with some of the responsiveness we've seen socially on social media with the services. And I actually thought the Air Force was a first mover here. And I was really happy about that. So as Black Lives Matter protests were gaining speed, so to speak, and gaining national attention, forcing conversations, General Goldfein, you know, Chief of the Air Force, had immediately had a conversation with Chief Master Sergeant Kayla Wright, who is an African American, and said, "I want to learn from you." And I think I don't have it in front of me, but Goldfein basically comes in and says, "I walk into a room, everyone looks like me. What is it like for you? And let's hear your stories. And we need to be as senior leaders tell more stories." And on social media, and Black Lives Matter is part of, you know, big social media component to that. Kayla Wright, Chief Master Sergeant O'Wright, has been doing stories, you know, and you can go to his Twitter and he's featuring his stories, other minorities, underrepresented stories. And interestingly, very quickly after, the highest enlisted of the Army, Sergeant Major of the Army, Michael Grinston, I want to say, did that. He's like, "I'm a biracial man, and this is my experience. I'm half Black and half white. And here we go." And so I think we can think of diversity and promoting inclusion from a bottom up as well as a top down. And I'm seeing a lot of great bottom up conversation. And so we can talk more in Q&A about top down, but I actually think Black Lives Matter is really positive for bottom up. And at minimum, you're going to have, at least for me, I'm inspired. And I'd like to think even if it's a few people have seen it, a few is better than zero, which was yesterday. So I think there is something to the social media component of Black Lives Matter and diversity in the military.
Yeah, I'm really excited of the change I am seeing. It has taken way too long. I'm going to date myself, so some of you are going to have to Google this on what I'm actually saying. But in 1992, there was a TV show, and it was The Golden Girls, which I'm really dating myself, but there was a great discussion about the Confederate flag. That was in 1992. Look how long it's taken to remove a Confederate flag from the flag of the state of Mississippi. Dr. Brooks, the next question's for you. Can you talk about the effects, if any, of retired military personnel, whether it's General Mattis, Secretary Powell, and their condemnations of the current administration on civil-military relations over the years and now?
So I'll take that in the direction of trying to figure out, you know, what is the significance of, say, the amount of retired officer dissent commentary that we saw in June. And just to remind everyone, you know, we saw a remarkable number of really senior, influential folks speaking out in opposition to Trump's interest in using the military to police American citizens. And I mean the federal forces, not the National Guard. And basically you had this slew of people speaking out with different themes, some talking about the importance of the Constitution, some talking about maintaining the nonpartisan ethic, others overtly, like Mattis, criticizing Donald Trump's leadership. And there has been sort of a long tradition, an unfortunate tradition in my estimation, of this kind of speech under Donald Trump, but even previously. And some may remember in 2006 when several retired generals spoke out about then Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld's management of the Iraq War. So this has happened before. I guess, there's a lot of different things we could say about it, but one thing to think about is, or two things to think about is, does it really have the effects that we think it does? So those who are the attentive public, who are paying attention, who are reading different media sources, are listening to Mattis and saying, wow, he really, he was Secretary of Defense. He worked with this guy. He has inside information. But if you're not sort of taking advantage of these broad media resources and you're watching one media source with Fox News, you might never know what Mattis really said. And you might hear him, maligned as, a Democrat, which for Fox News viewers is a pretty damn condemnation, right? So I think, this idea that this is really efficacious and affects domestic politics, I think we should really question that and really look at what the consequences of this speech are. And one of the reasons that's important is that it has, and this is my second point, is it has some consequences in that Americans don't necessarily make the distinction between retired officers and active duty officers and the military speaking. So when they hear Mattis say this, many of them may be thinking, oh, the military doesn't like Donald Trump, or that, there's a signal to the officers that are currently serving that, maybe they should be thinking about their partisan views and perspectives and taking that into account. And so it erodes this sort of general sense, this general sort of ethic that I keep talking about of nonpartisanship by making it look like the military really is a partisan actor. And what we haven't yet seen is the generals that are in support of Trump, right? Except for at the convention with Michael Flynn. But, we're heading into an election period. Since the 1990s, there's been all sorts of retired officer endorsements. Each candidate gets a big long list. And, what's that going to look like? What are the pro-Trump generals going to do? And what happens when the pro and the anti-Trump generals get out there speaking and making endorsements? And that's just ugly, especially any civil military relations analyst should have shivers up their spine thinking about that prospect. Maybe it won't happen, but the fact that we're even thinking about it is really worrisome from my perspective.
So Risa, I really like your comment about people not knowing, active duty versus retired. I will tell you just a quick story that I found humorous, but it's the reason why, to me, the Guard, whether it's the Army Guard or the Air Guard, is so important, is because most people don't see a military person. I was flying back on a trip, and this was the time when you could fly in your battle dress uniform, and I was coming back from a trip. I'm a general officer, so I got a uniform. I got some stars on it. It says United States Air Force, and this lady sat down next to me and says, "What do you do?" And I almost found it kind of comical at first. Well, I'm in uniform. You can take my picture, Google me. So I said, well, I'm in the United States Air Force. She goes, oh, I didn't know that. And I go, the uniform? She goes, well, I'm really not paying attention. How long have you been in? So I told her how long I was in, and she said, so you can't get a job in the civilian world? I go, well, it doesn't really work that way, but let me tell you why I serve my country. She had no understanding of the military. And I think that's part of the issue we have right now is as we got our bases smaller, we kind of have, the Army has some super bases. If you look at the Navy, they have big bases on the coast. The United States Air Force has gotten smaller, even though the United States Air Force will tell you, and I agree, that we need to get a little bit more smaller when it comes to infrastructure. But it just highlights the importance of the Guard, because in some states, I'll talk about my home state of Massachusetts, without the Guard, people would not know that there's a United States military, because it's those other people. And, the people wear a uniform because they're serving the nation, and they're, sons and daughters and mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters. And people just need to understand that. And they really don't understand it because we have gotten so small, and the numbers of people that are inside the Congress, very few have any military service. I have another question. Is there any different skill set required of political capable military leaders in combat successful leaders? Is Janowitz correct that the most senior military leaders are really political animals? Does anyone want to tackle that one?
I'll say something very.
Mookie and Risa, please.
But I'll just say this quickly. Quite honestly, at the highest levels of the Department of Defense and war, a lot of folks just think the military should, or the America can win our conflicts or dominate just with military. They are not. They're not educated about dime, so diplomacy and information, military and economics. And our senior leaders need to know, first of all, within our national defense strategy, one of the tenets of the national defense strategy is building partnerships with other nations, because we cannot do this by ourselves. And so if you have a senior military leader who is only blood and guts and chewing nails and spitting them out, that's not going to work. You have to have someone who is adept in diplomacy and politics in order to build these bridges with our partner nations. So I'll just start with that, and I'm sure my co-panelists have a lot more to say.
Risa?
Sure. Can you hear me? Okay. I definitely have a lot to say about that, but I'll keep my comments short so others can speak too. So one of the unfortunate byproducts of this sort of trope that we hear of an apolitical military and the need to maintain, sort of stay outside of partisan politics, has been that it's been interpreted that the military should military leaders should sort of block themselves off from all dimensions of politics, thinking about politics, thinking about domestic political factors in making decisions, thinking about the politics of their adversaries, the kinds of issues Mookie just mentioned. And that's really, in my own research, a real problem, because especially for senior military leaders interacting with senior civilian leaders, the president, secretary of defense, those folks need to understand both the constraints that those civilian policymakers are experiencing. They need to understand that strategic effectiveness requires political thought and political thinking, and a willingness to engage and embrace those dimensions of politics, and not just view it as a bad word and something that civilians, those partisan actors do anyway. So I definitely think we need to really rethink how we think about this idea of apolitical, and what should and should not be encompassed in that, and what are the really appropriate behavioral implications of that, and mindset implications of how senior military leaders in particular need to be political, and in what ways they should be and in what ways they should not be.
Risa, thank you. Rosella?
Yeah, and let me take this in a slightly different direction. And I love this question of I think the person phrased it as like a political animal. When I teach about the military, I spend a lot of time on political PME, right? Professional military education. And our senior leaders are some of the most educated, brilliant individuals because we as a society want to make sure that our senior leaders know what they're doing on multiple levels, right? They go to school multiple times, especially your senior officers at the 05, 06 levels, like year after year after year, right? So these are some of the most educated individuals in the United States. And I think we need to think about them as being educated on grand strategy, as being educated on domestic politics in other countries, as being educated on domestic politics in our country, in addition to just the smaller, almost myopic tip of spear goal. And so I think, we have to reframe who and what a senior leader does and looks like. And I know I'm going to take this a little farther afield, but I actually often have a problem with ads for recruitment. Because sometimes ads for recruitment are very like warrior and, it's like almost like a video game. And I'm like, well, you know what? Most people in the services are amazing bureaucrats. Okay. And I know it's not fun, but they sit at desks and they crunch out amazing good policy, and they're logisticians, and they're like thinking about nuclear, missileers and policies and grand strategy. So I think we need to reconceptualize what our ideal type in our mind of what officers and people in the military do. I know it's not boring to think about bureaucrats, but that's what we actually are dealing with.
Try to get any policy through the Pentagon and see how long it takes. Then you'll know that we're bureaucrats.
Right.
Yeah, so now I feel like crying because I was in the Pentagon a bunch, so I'm a bureaucrat. There is a great scene. One of my favorite movies is Patton with George C. Scott. There's a great scene at the end of the movie, and Patton is talking to Omar Bradley, and the discussion at the end was Patton was just saying that he was an anachronism. It was time for him to go because the future military leader needs to be a combat man. He needs to understand politics. He needs to understand history. It was a completely different type of environment than just building someone to do combat. I want to also bring up one thing that you have to understand when you're in the Pentagon is you can't forget the role of the Congress. Remember, Article 1 of the Constitution is the legislative branch. Article 2 is the executive branch. And in Article 1, the responsibilities to raise armies, support navies. I may have that wrong, but raise armies, support navies is the responsibility of the Congress. If you don't understand the politics to understand, first of all, the role of a senior military officer is to give the best military advice. You really need to understand that. Risa brought up something I think is really key. We're led by civilian leaders, whether it's the secretaries of the departments or whether it's the Secretary of Defense. You may have the most brilliant idea, but if that idea cannot get through the political hurdles, it is not a brilliant idea. And you need to understand that. I think the best advice I've gotten is understand what your boss understand what your boss does and walk in your boss's shoes. Remember, and I had a boss tell me once, this may be your problem, but it's not my problem. And I was a little offended. And then when I went home and I got mentored again, I realized that my boss was 100% correct. So understanding what the civilian leadership are going through is very, very important. I have a question that really applies to everybody on the panel. What role do you believe institutions like West Point have in strengthening? So I'll put West Point, the Air Force Academy, the Naval Academy have in strengthening the pipeline to leadership in the military. So if you look at the class of 2019-2020, West Point students were about 21% and women were 24%. So what role do those institutions have in the pipeline? So kind of open up. Rosella, please.
I can take that, which I guess feels odd because I feel maybe our military folks might be best at this. I actually, so full disclosure for the audience, we've kind of talked about this behind the scenes yesterday when we were convening this panel. But while while diversity in initial officer recruitment is great, that's not going to fix the image that I showed at the beginning of the JCS and the Joint Chiefs and our senior leaders. To get to that senior leadership level, that's a 20, 30-year career. So where you start, assuming, retention of these other things. So even if you have a great diverse class, what gets you to that top where we have true diverse leadership? And I think that goes into deeper issues of what's valued within each service. So it's not just that a particular service may say, yeah, we want more African-American leaders, we want more women leaders. But because of the nature of career fields within each service, you may not get there. So for example, I was just reading a piece on War in the Rocks, and we were having this discussion the other day. Traditionally, African-Americans have gone into logistics in the Army, but logistics isn't a valued career field. That has nothing to do with their race. It's the career field that's not valued. So logisticians are not in combat in the same way. They're not going to be valued. In the Air Force, you have amazing women, mostly in personnel. That has the highest of the career fields. But you don't have many generals that are personnelist. I don't know how many there are. I don't know if I could even name them. One right here, but other than that, very, very few. Same being missileers, right? So it's about reconceptualizing the service track. So unless we're going to get women and more minorities as pilots in the Air Force, you're not going to see them make their ranks up to senior leadership, no matter how the classes at West Point, the Air Force Academy, and others look. So I think it's a deeper problem than just saying, I want to fix the race issue, I want to fix the gender issue. It's restructuring entire cultures and value systems within the services.
So that's 100% correct, because each of the military service have tribes. And if you're not in that tribe, and what I mean by a tribe is pilots, navigators, missileers, intel, whether you're a logistician, right? Special ops. So, how long does it take to create, a general officer? It takes 26 years. But if you enter a career field, personnel, and there's only one top person in personnel, the chances of getting to that top position is very, very difficult. So
and that was the fire from some of those people as well, because if they see, why should I even bother to spend this extra time and grind it out if there's really no chance of me ever getting there, then we are taking the fire out of our people.
Exactly. So I want to go into a little different track. And the United States military, if you look at Gallup surveys, is rated extremely high. So on one end of the spectrum, it's the United States military. On the other end of the spectrum, it's Congress. That has been a long way. And if you look at what happened after the Vietnam War, the United States military had to rebuild that confidence with the American people. We lost that confidence with the American people. And now every single year, we're still the highest form. I hate to say we, because I consider myself still a member as a retired guy. The US military is ranked really high with confidence with the American public. The question I have is, with the divisiveness that's in Washington, D.C. right now, with all senior leaders coming out against the current administration, how do you see that confidence in the US military? Do you see it breaking down? Do you see us going back to the Vietnam War period when the United States military was not respected? So I'd like to get the panel's inputs on, where do you see confidence going in the future of the United States military?
I'm going to jump in, and I would love to hear Risa on this. I think she's the person for this question.
Risa, what are your thoughts on confidence in with the American public?
I gotta unmute. Okay, I'm unmuted. Okay, great. Yeah, there's a lot there to think about once again. I guess one thing just to point out about the Gallup figures, and there's also poll survey data that shows this as well, but Gallup in particular, it's not just reverence for the military, it's a real imbalance in a lack of reverence for other institutions. And I think that that's part of what many civil military relations people view as concerning, because you're sort of holding up one institution as the savior of the country, as the one institution that they have faith in, and then everything else is below that. And, you know, I'll just cite something to give you an example. I believe it was a Pew survey that asked people, you know, who contributes the most to the welfare of American society? And the military beat out teachers there. And I think that is a striking finding, a striking response, right? And contrary to what I think a lot of people would think really builds the foundation of society. So, you know, what about the confidence of the military? And I think that it's already in a precarious state. And I think it goes back to these partisan issues that I raised before, in part because there's already a partisan skew in confidence in the military. So while Americans in general revere the military, Republicans like it a lot more. And so, you know, what happens if you don't maintain this nonpartisan ethic, if the military itself, some of its officers, and society applauds this, you know, start acting like partisan actors? I think you just see a dramatic erosion of that social esteem and a real imbalance there in sort of who likes the military and who doesn't. And that's a really concerning development if you think comparatively, globally, and historically. That is not the situation you want a military in any democratic country, in any non-democratic country too. But it's, you really, you know, I guess there's like a few things I believe in the world, and keeping militaries out of politics is just baseline for me, and it's not healthy where we're heading. And the reason, I'll just add this last thing. One of the reasons you see retired military officers speaking out so much now is that they remember with long careers what it was like in the Vietnam era when the military didn't have the sort of reverence of society. And they are thinking about what's going to happen if the military just looks like another partisan player, and where does that social esteem head? And so that's a perspective that's informing some of the things that we're seeing going on today.
Risa, thank you. I want to interrupt because there's one more question. We have about a few minutes left, but it's from one of my students from last semester, and I want to make sure it gets there. Individual has been in the military for about 13 years. He's East Indian descent. No one looked like him throughout his entire time. His question is, how do we increase diversity in an all-volunteer force? Is the problem with recruitment, accessions, or promotions? So how do we increase diversity in the force? We kind of talked about a little bit before that if you're going to go into personnel and you want to be a 4-star general, that's not going to happen. So how do we increase diversity? What's the best way to do it?
I'd like to say right now we have a lot of senior officers and officials who talk the talk, but we cannot just keep trying to send recruiters who are E5s, E6s, and E7s into the cities and into the rural counties and expect these youngsters of all backgrounds to be motivated. We need people who look like me. We need people who look like your student to go and talk to the people in these schools and make the time. I cannot say, oh, I'm too busy to go visit that junior high school or that high school. Those are the formative years where they have an impression. And if they see somebody who looks like me, they'll go, okay, it can be done. I swear to you, even to this day, even when I was a colonel, people would see me in uniform sometimes, even in DC, and go, you're a colonel? You're a black colonel? I go, holy smokes. Are we that rare? But it took that for me to say, holy smokes, I need to get out there and start talking to these kids. And the same thing with people of East Indian descent, of East Asian descent, of South Asian descent, of all descents. We need to get our senior people who look like that to go talk to these kids, but not only to the kids, but to their parents too. Because a lot of times I found when I'm going to different churches or schools, the parents are saying, I don't know if I want my son or daughter to go. I don't know if y'all going to treat them right. And I have to convince the parents that, no, we intend on taking good care of your son or daughter. But a lot of times the kids are all for it, but the parents are going, no way. So we senior people have to get out there and be fully engaged and be diplomats.
So I had a boss tell me in the late 80s, that's 100% correct, that the reason that if you're trying to solve a problem, and if you look at what's going on right now in the international security environment, forgetting politics, there's a lot of challenges in the world. The only way we're going to solve challenges is to have people that think differently from different backgrounds. Because if everyone looks the same and thinks the same, we're going to come up with the same answers, and that has not worked well for us.
We'll be easily defeated.
Easily. We have a lot of challenges coming up. I wish we could talk longer. This has been a great discussion. I want to thank Dr. Brooks from participating, and as well as General Walker. It's been a phenomenal time hearing everyone's inputs. Rosella, I think as we've talked about before, it looks like there's a couple of courses we need to develop that we need to build at Boston University, because we've had a lot of topics today that really lend themselves for new types of education, so we can have these dialogues, because it's the young people today that can help solve some of the problems that my generation obviously failed at, because we're still fighting the same issues. To everyone that participated today, thank you very much. To our panel members, thank you, and it's been a pleasure. And I can't wait to get back into the classroom, spending time with our students. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.